Symposium with Ash Aulak.
Hi guys, welcome to Waxing Lyrical, the music installment of the Symposium podcast. I'm delighted to be on our second episode with Jay, Arjun and Cameron. So Arjun, how have you been recently? What have you been listening to?
Hey, not bad. Just chilling out the last couple of days. My birthday yesterday, so had a nice time.
Happy birthday.
Chilling out with my family. Thank you. In terms of what I've listened to since the last time we recorded, I think it's been about 11, 12 days since our first episode. And as you may know, I listen to quite a lot of music. So I think I've listened to 26 or 27 albums since then.
Wow, okay.
To be honest, most of them have been pretty mediocre. I haven't really listened to any outstanding ones. Probably the best one that I listened to was one yesterday by Eric B. and Rakim, like a 90s hip-hop duo called Don't Split the Technique. That was a really good listen. It's like one of those early sort of classic hip-hop albums that I would recommend. Yeah, if you listen to a lot of music, there's always bound to be a lot of mediocre guff in there. And yeah, I don't mind that because it means that I'm almost able to better discern the good from the bad, if that makes sense. But yeah, a lot of average, to be honest. But yeah, that's been my week in music, my week and a half in music so far.
Yeah, cool. Cameron, what have you been listening to?
Hi, yeah, so I suppose you could say my last week and a half or so has been quite cinematic. I was very saddened recently by the death of Ennio Morricone, the Italian film composer. He's probably my favorite film soundtrack composer of all time. So I've just been revisiting a lot of his stuff because, I mean, a lot of my introduction to film music from a very early age that I can remember was his work. So yeah, I've been listening to the soundtrack albums for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West, for a few dollars more, which is actually my personal favorite. And a lot of his stuff. You'd think that a film soundtrack has to go with a film to be fully appreciated, but the strength of his compositions are such that the emotion that you can see he's trying to evoke when paired with the visuals, that resonates whilst you're just listening to it on its own. That's the power of the music that he wrote. And yeah, I've just been sort of lamenting the loss to the music in the music world that we've had with his passing, and listened to a lot of him recently.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I've been doing the same. It's very sad that he passed. Jay and I are massive fans of those films and obviously those soundtracks. I think Ecstasy of Gold in Good and Bad, the Ugly is probably my favorite bit of music that he's composed, at least in the film scene. And yeah, you're completely right in that as you listen to it, you get flashes of the scene in front of you of the film itself, and it's just really powerful score making and filmmaking. Jay, what have you been listening to?
I've actually listened to quite a bit this past week. I recently got Rate Your Music, so I started like kind of working through the charts on that. They've got like a the top rated albums list. But I've got to say I kind of moved away from that. I think the standout track for me has been Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, which I finally got listened to this week. I thought that was just a brilliant album. It was completely cohesive. It's got, songs that run in excess of kind of 5 or so minutes. And, it doesn't get boring. It feels brand new, even though it's from like the 90s. It's a really, really fantastic album. So I think that's kind of been my highlight of the past week musically.
No, I mean, again, I can empathize massively. That's one of my favorite hip hop albums ever. I think its cultural influence is understated, if that's even possible. And I mean, I adore the album. And yeah, I've also had my own, incursions into 90s hip hop in the last week or so. I re-listened to Ready to Die. and yeah, and I re-listened to Reasonable Doubt by Jay-Z, just to kind of ground my hip hop taste more, because obviously most of my taste is like more conscious modern stuff, but you understand that stuff better when you appreciate where it came from. So
Yeah,
yeah, I
completely.
mean that's kind of what I've been trying to do.
Yeah, if I could
Yeah,
just interrupt, sorry.
yeah.
So I think Jay mentioned Rate Music, which is quite a useful website. I would recommend using it. Um, a lot of stuff on there, like all the charts, can be quite sort of basic, normie taste, but I think they're really useful for educating yourself about different genres, whether it's hip hop or rock or whatever. They have really nice sort of charts and lists that I'm sure Jay's used to sort of explore a bit more. So yeah, that's a really good website. I personally have found that very useful to discover lots of different albums. And it also has lots of info about each album, obviously. So yeah, it's quite a good website.
Yeah, without further ado, then I think we should just jump into our albums for this week. So if you could each say what your chosen album was. So I'll start. I chose Urban Hymns by the Verve, classic bit of 90s kind of Britpop era, but maybe slightly more profound than that. I think it's definitely underappreciated album compared to some of the more famous albums from Oasis, Blur, and Pulp. I think there are some absolute, frankly, bangers in the album. Everyone kind of knows Bittersweet Symphony from the England intro on ITV, but it's much deeper than that. And often I find people finding tracks on the album that they didn't even know were by the Verve, but they had obviously heard them before from somewhere else. So it's that kind of album. So I thought it was worth a listen. Cameron, what did you choose?
So my choice this week was It'll End in Tears, which is the debut album by the music collective This Mortal Coil. And this album I chose because I'm a massive dream pop fan. Anything with echoey chorus guitars and a woman's breathy vocals over, and I'm basically there for it. But this is a very nice album artistically because in my eyes it bridges the gap between your late 70s atmospheric post-punk artists like Joy Division, Bauhaus, with your early 90s, late 80s, fully fledged dream pop artists like Cocteau Twins, who actually feature on this record, and the more shoegazy influences like My Bloody Valentine. And it's a nice sort of middle point there between those two styles, and I think it captures the best of those two genres quite well.
Thank you very much, Cameron. Jay?
Well, if you can say I chose, the album I picked was Playing with Fire by Kevin Federline. You might know it as the lowest rated album on Metacritic. Obviously, I hadn't listened to it before. I was just interested. So basically, for those of you who don't know, Kevin was married to Britney Spears. He released this album back in 2006 at the height of, I guess, what he claims was his fame. And essentially, the album pretty much deals with him believing that he's the most hated man in America, him believing he's the most famous man in America. And it's not really the most triumphant artistic achievement of the 21st century, but it's probably also...
What do you mean it's not better than anything by Bob Dylan?
Yeah, it's kind of like, I think the way I would describe it is, you know, the early songs in My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, where Kanye kind of deals with, you know, the impact of fame. It's kind of like that, but you know, without any talent to back it up, and probably without any fame in the first place.
Right. Okay. I mean, I'm intrigued. Arjun.
Yeah, I chose the album Monkey Bars by Sean Price. So in the 90s, he was sort of an underground rapper, part of the hip hop duo Helter Skelter, and part of the underground hip hop collective called Boot Camp Click. And he was sort of very famous in the hip hop underground, but didn't really get his props, especially if you compare to other famous duos or groups in the 90s, such as the Wu-Tang Clan, Mobb Deep, and rappers like Nas. But he sort of split from Helter Skelter in the middle of the noughties and released this album, which has become a very much an underground classic. Sadly, Sean Price passed away, I think, 5 years ago. So his discography isn't too expansive. I think he only released 3 albums prior to his death, plus a posthumous album. But I think this stands as one of the finest underground albums of of this century in hip hop.
All right, thank you for that, Arjun. Arjun, so I guess considering you just finished your description there, I think it's apt for you to go first and just take us through what you thought about the album. Then we'll obviously just take turns offering our own thoughts. So yeah, have a go.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed this album. I think it's quite an enjoyable listen. The lyrics are very comical. I think that's what stands out for me. Yeah, lots of lyrics sort of make you laugh and laugh out loud. I really like the delivery of Sean Price's lyrics as well. He's very sharp on the mic, always on the mark, and never really skips a beat. But yeah, the most endearing part of the album are the lyrics. They're quite ignorant in a way, I'd say, but also quite fun. It's sort of, he conveys his sort of careless attitude in the album. And yeah, I also really like his voice. He has quite an enjoyable voice, and he has a really good flow. But yeah, I think it's quite an enjoyable listen. I want to know like what you guys think of the listen, because each song sort of stands out. The beats are very good. Yeah, I just want to know what you guys think of it.
Yeah, I mean, Jay, if you'd like to go first.
So I'm going to start in a weird place, but it's just one thing I really like about the album, which is the cover art. I actually think it's just something that took my attention straight away before even listening to the music. I just thought the cover art was really cool. It's kind of like a comic book style. I quite liked the album. It was one of those things where I think it wasn't maybe necessarily my kind of thing. It's very, as you say, it's very underground. One of those kind of comments I saw, as someone said, it's kind of like a rap album for people who like rap, if that makes sense. It's like a rapper's rap album.
A rapper's rap album, yeah.
I think that's definitely probably a fair way of characterizing it. I thought some of the lyrics, as you said, were very funny. Also, I did quite like the final song because it's the Grand Theft Auto theme song. I think it's from Grand Theft Auto 3.
Yeah.
So that was a massive throwback.
Yeah.
That was a huge throwback. I enjoyed the album. I think the production was good. I thought it was a good album. I thought the production was good. I thought the lyrics were good. I do think I maybe preferred, just to kind of go back to last week's episode, I probably preferred listening to Medellin over this, because I preferred kind of the more sample-driven, sample-driven bass of the songs. Whereas here it was more kind of traditional underground hip hop, which maybe I'm just slightly less inclined to.
Yeah, and I would also say the beats are very much underground. Like they sound so sort of basement cooked that the audio quality comes across as a bit spotty at times.
Yeah,
so that maybe affects the listen.
Yeah, I think there were tiny little points where I maybe couldn't quite understand what exactly was being said. But I think that's probably quite common, and also when rapping, because obviously you're speaking quite fast as well.
So did you find anything that he said interesting or provocative or just worth engaging with?
I can't really remember anything, to be honest. There was nothing that really stands out.
That's fair enough.
A couple of days ago. Maybe that's a criticism I have.
No, that's fair enough. Obviously, that actually says quite a lot in itself. Cameron.
Yeah, I would concur with what Arjun said. I thought this was a very energetic, bouncy, fun listen for the most part. The lyrics obviously do stand out. They've got this comical edge to it, which I think provides quite a nice counterpoint to the gritty, I hesitate to call it lo-fi because it's not like, Neutral Milk Hotel have done a rap album here.
No. But
it is quite a lo-fi, gritty, East Coast type vibe I'm getting off the production. So I do think your sort of bouncier, happier, comical lyrics, they do balance that out quite nicely. One thing I in particular enjoyed about this project was the features on it. In particular, I really liked Tech's feature on the track Onion Head. I don't know, I just thought the flows and the bars, the vocal delivery, it just got switched up really quite nicely throughout this record, to the point where I know, Jay, you said that you preferred Medellin from last week. For me, it was actually the variation and the fact that every track on this I thought was refreshingly different. I really did quite enjoy this one. I'd probably give it a 7 to an 8 for me. This was a good album.
So that's a strong 7 to a light 8 to quote perhaps the Melon.
To quote the god, yes.
Yeah. I was going to mention Onion Head as well. Actually, I really liked that track. I liked the sampling in the production. It felt kind of underground, East Coasty. From what I've engaged with the Wu-Tang Clan, obviously, Arjun's going to take me through a detailed tutorial of their work. But from what I've engaged so far, it kind of evokes some of those themes, especially after listening more recently to other rap from the 90s. I can definitely see what Sean's trying to do here in linking back to those traditions. In terms of the content, yeah, I agree that it had a kind of comedic edge, although I felt that some of the bars, although he altered his flow far more than we saw in Medellin with Smooth, I do feel that some of the bars do tend to fall flat in that the messages that they're trying to convey, perhaps sometimes even whimsical in their comedy, then although providing a nice contrast to the grittiness, undermine some of the sincerity of his messages around the grittiness that you find elsewhere in the album. And maybe that uncomfortable dichotomy is intentional, but I do feel like, so it's obviously, if it is intentional, it's a fair enough point about the kind of incongruousness of his life. But even so, it does make you slightly question the competing themes.
Yeah.
Arjun, could you explain a bit more about kind of why you chose this for us?
I feel that it was very, as everyone has said, a very energetic album, and I thought it'd be quite a nice contrast to sort of more gritty albums that you may have listened to from hip hop. To see how underground hip hop can be light and energetic rather than just sort of dark and grimy compared to say like Medellin. But I do like the contrast between his sort of energetic, boastful lyrics and the dark, sometimes gritty production on the album. If you think of a rapper such as, say, Jay-Z, you think of someone very braggadocious, very arrogant, and who conveys that in his rhymes. But what I like about Sean Price's rapping style is how he sort of mixes up clever punchlines, clever beats with sometimes exaggerated stories from his life.
Yeah.
So I think in the track Brokest Rapper You Know, he gets quite personal about his struggles and his how he struggled to get to where he is. And then like in the next track he's promising that he's going to take you down and attack you, and just the classic sort of hip hop arrogance. I find that contrast quite nice. Quite enjoyable, I think.
Yeah, no, it's good. Just completely agreeing with you on the contrast. I think one of our criticisms of Medellin was that it was very samey. I don't think you can say the same about Monkey Bars, in that you have kind of Spliff and Wesson, which gives me kind of Eastern Orientalist vibes or maybe Middle Eastern vibes, versus kind of Heartburn, which is more like traditional R&B soul vibes. And I think that you can get those nice contrasts, which perhaps display a more sophisticated expression than we saw with Smooth last week.
Yeah, and also the title of the album, Monkey Bars, is sort of like a lyrical exhibition of how you can contrast wild lyrics with energetic production. So I think it's quite enjoyable listen. That's why I recommended it to you guys.
I actually had, I'm not sure if you guys agree. I mean, feel free to say either way, but I got some vibes of MF Doom in some parts of this, just in terms of content, delivery, flow variation, and obviously that's a reasonable competent because I'm a fan of Doom. But I mean, Arjun, Cameron, I know that you two both have listened to a lot of what Doom's done, and I wondered whether you see that comparison as well. I mean, Cameron?
I can completely see that. I think, as Arjun was saying, it's the kind of braggadocious attitude whilst being self-aware of that throughout that, really brings that comparison out. He's got the ability to make these grandiose, kind of ludicrous statements sometimes, but he has the temerity to balance that out with a bit of self-deprecation and humor, and that is a quality that you don't often see in hip-hop sometimes, I think. So that's why for me it was quite a refreshing album.
Arjun?
Yeah, I sort of think of rappers like Sean Price as the anti-MF Doom, because whereas MF Doom uses like a really large vocabulary to invoke imagery and controls his flow in a sort of abstract, offbeat manner, and sometimes uses spoken word, Sean Price sort of uses inner bar rhyme schemes, syllables, and focuses more on delivery.
Yes.
Whereas MF Doom is all about the lyrics, and But they do compare in that, you know, they start a bar, they start a rhyme, and you think it's just sort of going where you expect it to go, and then they flip it on its head and sort of subvert your expectations. Both of them have this ability to switch between like stone cold serious and then switch the absolute ridiculous, the absolute abstract. But yeah, I can see where you're coming from. To be honest, yeah.
I think it might also be some of the references they make. I mean, Jay, what are your thoughts on how you place this versus other rap you've listened to?
I think I just, as I kind of said earlier, I said I'm not probably the most inclined to underground rap. So I think I do prefer stuff like, you know, like Kendrick, Kanye, which is a bit more kind of, I think there's almost more kind of experimentation of other music styles going on in those records.
Yes.
Whereas this felt, you know, this is very much a traditional rap album. I think I'd probably have to listen to it maybe one or two more times to really kind of probably appreciate, you know, all the nuances and the depth in it. But I thought it was a good album. I enjoyed listening to it. So I'm not going to complain. But
no, I mean, that's why we're having the podcast. I mean, we're all introducing each other to different stuff. Like you introduced Arjun last week to Illinois. And now I know he can introduce you to this. So I guess, you know, that's quite a nice.
And then you infected Kevin Federline on us.
Well, actually, Arjun, on that note, Jay, tell us about the album.
So Playing with Fire, I've already said it's the lowest ranked album on Metacritic. Just to put it into perspective, its current score is 15 out of 100. And that's pretty much half as low as the next lowest rated album.
Right.
It's basically one of those albums that it's kind of funny because I don't actually think it's as bad as people say. I think it's a bad album. I think it's, you know, it's unremarkable, it's boring, it's uninteresting. There's nothing in it where there was no song where I kind of stopped and thought, oh my god, this is the worst thing I've ever listened to. I think it's kind of, we were speaking briefly about this last week, but we said about, you know, we'd rather listen to something really bad than something that's just painfully mediocre. And I think that's pretty much exactly what I would say this is. It's just a painfully mediocre, uninteresting, uninspired, boring record made by someone who pretty much thought he had the world at his feet and thought he had, you know, every right to make this album. And he just did it. And it's just it just sounds like a half-assed effort. There's no song that really, you know, that isn't kind of a bit of a chore to listen to or that really stands out to you. That being said, I mean, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I wouldn't say it's like a 1 out of 10. Even to an extent, there's the song on it called Crazy, which features Britney Spears. And honestly, I've heard that woman in worse songs. You know, like, I'd even say Scream and Shout with Will I Am is a worse song, to be honest.
I mean, yeah, I guess I get what you mean in that Kevin, for all his kind of braggadocious nature and perhaps overly...
He's very self-assured, isn't he?
Yeah. I mean, it's just essentially what I'm trying to say is kind of the way that he views himself is obviously in a light that bears no resemblance to reality. Far more flattering, I guess, is the word.
He refers to himself to the third person as well.
Yeah. And I mean that I find that to be even slightly less. The reason why I find that to be more mediocre than something like a bad Will I Am record that you just mentioned there is because Will I Am there, I think, is more serious in his kind of self-belief and the seriousness of the quality of the track. Whereas Kevin, for all his kind of bragging and his, you know, perceived seriousness, really, I mean, does he even think that he's up there? Like, I sometimes thought that this was almost a meme or like a kind of, or kind of like a YouTube parody of what someone else would be doing. So I think that's why it was mediocre rather than awful in some ways.
Yeah, to an extent. I also thought, while I was listening to this, I kind of felt like this album almost sounds like how, you know, my parents' generation would expect a rap album to sound like.
Right.
It kind of just feels like a walking stereotype of rap rather than a rap album. It's, you know, you've even got people called Yeah Boy on it. You know, it's just such a meme. It doesn't take itself very seriously.
That's why I'm saying, I mean, I find it to be less offensive to me than an album which takes itself so seriously but is awful. Like some of the Kid Cudi, so like unfortunately, like some of the stuff Kid Cudi or Chance the Rapper have come out with more recently. Cameron.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow on from that, I think the problem that this album has sometimes, and I want to preface everything I say, but this is not a good album by any stretch of the imagination, but it has a quality in how serious he takes his own claims, his own
Yeah.
ridiculous claims to be.
Yeah.
You have to come from that. You have to approach that with such a mindset of just saying, even if this is terrible, I'm going to say it and no one's going to stop me. That in itself is a bit of a quality, I
It's
think.
almost Kanye-like, isn't it?
It's Kanye without the talent is I
Yeah.
think the best way to describe it. But I mean, musically as well, I want to contextualize this, and mid 2000s pop rap. It's not a scene that's renowned for its great sonic output. I remember artists like Chingy and, oh god, all the terrible G Unit stuff. In the middle of that, this really isn't that terrible. It's definitely not the worst album ever made. Put it that way.
Arjun.
Yeah, I can everything basically. It was very mediocre, the album, but it wasn't downright terrible. Like, I've listened to a lot worse. Like, even some of the beats weren't that bad. Like, if there were perhaps better rappers on it, they would pass as average to decent songs. But I'm just curious. So we've all agreed that it wasn't a terrible album. But okay, it was a bad album, but it wasn't really offensively terrible. I'm just curious as to how it got this bad backlash. Like, was it because of Kevin himself? Like, was he such a sort of memey figure that people were offended that he would release a rap album? Because from what I gathered, he released this album because he was famous for being married to Britney Spears or something. Like, he wanted to capitalize on his fame. Like, I didn't understand where he was coming from. I wonder if Jay would want to tell us a bit more about him.
Yeah, I almost felt like while I was listening to it that there was one critic who wrote a review and just said, this is the worst album ever made. And then a bunch of other people just kind of like, yeah, why not? Let's just agree with that guy. It kind of almost felt like people were jumping on a bandwagon here. A lot of the comments seem to just say, this is boring, it's uninteresting, it's, some guy who's not particularly famous acting like he's the most notorious man on earth. I mean, he's literally got a song called America's Most Hated on this album. It just seems like a lot of people, I think that's a lot about him and his arrogance that seems to fuel the reviews. But yeah, I'm kind of puzzled as to why it's the lowest rated score on the website. It kind of, to me, almost feels like a reverse version of Sgt. Pepper's, where just a bunch of people said it's like the best album ever made, and no one wanted to disagree, and they all kind of just stuck with that opinion.
So you're saying that Sgt. Pepper isn't the greatest album ever made, are you, Jay?
I'm saying Sgt. Pepper's isn't even probably top 4, top 5 Beatles albums.
Wow. Okay, that's not okay. That is definitely another pod.
Take for another time.
Yeah. That is a take for that's too hot to handle for right now. I think I have to get my fire extinguisher. Right. I think we should now move on to slightly firmer ground. Let's move on to urban hymns. I want to escape away from Kevin's delusion. So yeah. Urban hymns, I'm sure you guys know pretty much what you were getting from the outset. As I said, some famous tracks. I think from a really, really nice era of music that kind of built on some of the gains in 80s pop in the terms of the confidence and use of electric music and synths, but with a kind of harking back and respect for the 1960s stuff with the Beatles and other bands in the first British invasion of America, like the Kinks, etc., in the kind of melodic ballad making. And it led to quite a nice combination that we've seen with Pulp and I think the Verve quite specifically, but also obviously with the most famous bands of Oasis and Blur. I really like this album for personal reasons. My dad played this kind of music all the time in the car when I was young, and I got a good taste for it back then. And obviously, as I said, some of the songs, The Drugs Don't Work, Lucky Man, Bittersweet Symphony, these are all in kind of the public consciousness. I'm sure you'd all heard them before, even if you didn't know they were by the Verve. So I thought it was worth listening to. And yeah, Cameron, I know that you're kind of fan of this era as well. So yeah, you'd like to start.
I do, yeah. I love Britpop music, and I really love this album. The best way I can summarize this album very generally, which is a complete compliment, even though it might not sound like it, is this is the album that I would imagine Radiohead would have made if they hadn't made OK Computer. It's a direct sequel to The Bends, insofar as it's the experimental side of Britpop, and it executes that very well, I think. The standout tracks for me are The Rolling People and Neon Wilderness.
Both quality.
They're both great tracks, and it builds upon the Verve's early career in a beautiful way, because I must admit I'm a shoegaze guy. I actually do prefer the Verve's earlier stuff, A Storm in Heaven, A Northern Soul, both brilliant albums. But I can appreciate this album, and I do really love it. And obviously you've got other songs in there, like, I mean, Bittersweet Symphony, it goes without saying, is a masterpiece, but you've got The Drugs Don't Work, Lucky Man, as you were saying. They're all anthems, and they're all so evocative of the Britpop era at its best that this is, for me, Britpop's perfect swan song to see that era off.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the combination of the kind of electronica of the 80s, as you see in like kind of Radiohead, with the engaging with the alternative and even classic rock styles of Pink Floyd, the Beatles, and then obviously alternative rock from Radiohead, all merged together is why I kind of really enjoy this album. And I think it's something, this album wasn't really equaled by, in my opinion, this maybe is controversial, by many of the other Britpop bands, except for like in individual tracks. Like I'd say something like The Importance of Being Idle by Oasis is the closest they come out of a lot of their tracks to, or maybe Live Forever is one of the closest they've come out of their tracks to kind of matching this. And I don't think it's actually up there with it. I think Pulp, with their unique style, obviously have their own place in the kind of pantheon of Britpop, but I do feel like this album, for me at least, stands above those. Arjun, what are your thoughts? This is not a genre and a type of music you listen to often or normally.
Exactly. But I have heard a decent amount of Britpop. I've listened to Oasis. I've listened to their albums. I've listened to, I think, one Pulp album, although I can't remember what it's called. But it's this album by Verve sort of fed into everything I knew and liked about Britpop, but exceeded it, I think.
That's nice.
Yeah, I did enjoy the album. I haven't heard any Britpop albums for a long time. Like, this is the sort of music I was into, I'd say 3 years ago, like 3 or 4 years ago, quite a lot, but then sort of never really listened to properly since. So as a result, if I were to listen to a Blur album or Oasis album again, I would have difficulty remembering some of the songs and everything like that. But I did enjoy the album. Obviously, Bittersweet Symphony is a great song. It's one that I liked before anyway. I didn't actually know it was a Verve song, to my
there you go.
Embarrassment, which he pointed out to me. But that was good. I also really liked I think Drugs Don't Try.
Drugs Don't Work.
The Drugs Don't Work. Yeah, that was a really nice song. How do they rank in the pantheon of the Britpop Hall of Fame? Like, are they among? Obviously, I don't think the Verve get the props that Oasis do or Blur do. But do you think in your mind they're better?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what I said. I think this album exceeds a lot of or pretty much all of what Oasis and Blur have done. I think Pulp, it's hard to compare them with Pulp because, as Cameron knows, they kind of occupy their own niche. But yeah, certainly for me, this is the best Britpop album I've listened to, certainly. Jay, what are your thoughts?
So I like this album, but I do want to start off with one slightly hot take, which is that I actually think Bittersweet Symphony is one of the weaker songs on the album.
Okay.
It's one of those songs, it's kind of a consistent criticism I have throughout of the album as a whole, but I think Bittersweet Symphony is one of those songs that if it was like 2 minutes shorter, it would be a lot better. I don't necessarily think it's interesting enough to kind of keep rolling and rolling for nearly 6 minutes. I think it's one of those songs I never really listened to all the way through. I kind of listened to 2 minutes of it and then I've had enough and I'm done. But I thought, as you said, when they get into kind of experimental territory with, Neon Wilderness, what was probably my personal favorite song was Velvet Morning. I think it becomes a really good album and there's some fantastic songs on here. I think there's a good mix of kind of almost borderline psychedelic and Neon Wilderness with really emotional songs like The Drugs Don't Work. The Drugs Don't Work, I also, because it kind of feels like it was released, I think it was released the day after Princess Diana died.
Right.
And it sounds weird, but it kind of does sound like this nation in mourning as a song. It's very melancholic. It's very sad. It almost kind of feels like, a point in time that's gone and this like disillusionment in contrast to kind of, in contrast to something like Bittersweet Symphony, which just sounds to me like a fairly generic 90s track that's been kind of placed into my head.
Yeah.
I do agree with you though. There's a lot of songs where I was like, oh right, I've heard this. For better or for worse, I thought maybe some songs like Lucky Man or maybe a little bit generic, but I like it when they kind of go into experimental territory, and I think they do it really well at points.
I mean, that's why I kind of like the album, precisely because some of those songs are generic and that it combines the best of the entire era, as Cameron said, as an almost swan song, a kind of greatest hits of Britpop. You have the kind of iconic long song in Bittersweet Symphony, which is obviously sampled to death, which is respected for its classically instrumental quality. You have the more alternative rock Radiohead style synth stuff from other songs like Velvet Morning, etc. And then you have the more generic pop style or pop rock style bangers with Lucky Man or The Drugs Don't Work, which hark back to Britpop's strong relationships with 1960s UK invasion kind of music. I mean, Cameron, Arjun asked the question generally, like where does this rank in Britpop more widely? I mean, what are your views on that?
For me, well, like you sort of alluded to, I'm a pulp guy first and foremost. Different Class is
Right.
the epitome of perfect Britpop for me. But this, as I said, it's a swan song for me, and it's a good swan song because I can't think of another really great Britpop album that came out after this dropped. I think I'm right in saying this came out, I think it was a month after Be Here Now by Oasis, which, it's kind of famous for being one of the biggest flops in pop music history, even though I actually kind of quite like it. But in terms of albums with this great standing or great mythology even behind them, I can't think of another one that came after this. So I think it definitely has its place in the pantheon of Britpop there, because it seemingly single-handedly brought the genre to its natural denouement, its natural finish, which I can respect it for. It's a nice summation of every influence and every great bit of music that came up to that point. So it's a brilliant album for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I entirely agree. As I've said, I think it builds nicely on albums which are less known, like Moseley Shoals by Ocean Colour Scene. I think those kind of albums with the classic guitar riffs and the almost 60s, 70s style classic rock, soft rock styles are incorporated nicely, as well as we said, more psychedelic stuff. But yeah, I'm happy you guys on the whole thought that it was an enjoyable album. It's certainly one of my favorites, but maybe that's for more kind of emotional, nostalgic reasons rather than, I don't know, rational appreciations of the music. Yeah, I mean, Cameron.
So yeah, my choice, as I said, was It'll End in Tears by This Mortal Coil, who aren't a band, so to speak, really. They are a collective of artists from the 4AD record label. And this was compiled by the label head, Evo Watts Russell. So the best comparison I can sort of give for this is it's sort of like the Phil Spector Presents a Christmas Gift for You album with all his girl groups like the Ronettes and the Crystals, only instead of Wall of Sound, you've got nascent dream pop. So you can see that in the list of artists that's featured. You've got people like Simon Raymond and Elizabeth Fraser from Cocteau Twins, the vocalist Cindy Sharp, and even some of the classic post-punk figures like Howard Devoto from the Buzzcocks. And the result of that is not some mishmash album with disconnected themes, but this really tight record that encapsulates the birth of a genre, and that genre is dream pop. So I'm really intrigued to hear what you guys think about this one.
Arjun.
Yeah, it was okay because personally I thought it was it wasn't a very stimulating listen. I thought to listen to it was quite almost monotonous. But I mean, I thought that the vocals didn't really contribute anything to the songs. I thought that I'd rather just have had the music alone, if that makes sense. But I can appreciate it for what it was. but it was a bit of a mixed bag for me to listen to really enjoy the whole way through, because it's not something you'd put on in the background because I feel like it demands your attention, but also it isn't stimulating enough to keep my undivided attention. Personally, that's what I felt anyway. I think I guess it was a cohesive listen, but the songs by themselves weren't anything special, but I guess I might be on my own in that regard, perhaps.
Jay?
I think I'm actually on a similar page to Arjun on this one. I quite liked the album. I thought there were a couple of really good songs. Funnily enough, my favourite one was the third track. I'm going to say it's called Feet, F-Y-T. It's an instrumental. I thought that was cool. It had this kind of menacing, almost kind of like the Eraserhead score is the way I describe it. It's got this like haunting industrial landscape kind of sound to it. I thought maybe the album could have even started at like opening to that, because I think you almost need this instrumental track to kind of get you into the mood, because then I liked the next few songs. I was kind of taken into the right kind of atmosphere that the album was trying to create. I do disagree with Arjun on the vocals. I couldn't tell you what her name is. It's the woman who sang Song to Siren.
That's Liz Fraser from Cocktail Twins.
Yeah, because she actually had this like siren-y kind of waily voice, which I thought was really cool. And also on the song Found Affections, one thing I found really interesting was that it was this like whoosh sound kind of cutting over the vocals. And it was really like kind of provocative and really just kind of kept throwing you out of the song. And I thought that was just a very interesting way to do it, a very interesting approach to, like production of a song, because it was so completely unconventional.
I mean, I think I massively disagree with Jay and Arjun. I don't. This might be slightly long, but I think I really, really enjoyed it. I can definitely see how this fits into Cameron's taste and also kind of mine, in that it definitely builds on almost the Velvet Underground, Ultravox kind of operatic pop synth dream pop vibes, and almost Syd Barrett type vibes, like heroin Syd Barrett type vibes.
Yeah, I definitely know where you're coming from.
Yeah, specifically heroin Syd Barrett. And then it moves and it kind of follows directly from Ultravox to Vienna, which I think was 4 years before this, which is one of my all-time favorite albums. And
it's my all-time favorite song.
Yeah. And it positions itself beautifully in that tradition as a kind of precursor to something like Animal Collective, but as something which follows or is a successor to something like Velvet Underground, Ultravox, etc. I really, really like the spooky, almost Kate Bush style vocals throughout the album. The song Holocaust really stuck out to me, as in the intro with the almost classical music felt like an adagio of a quality symphony, something like Mahler's Second or Shostakovich's Fifth. The kind of legato, dulcet tones, which are almost minor in their key, but not in their meaning or evocation. And I really liked how that transitioned nicely into the almost whimsical kind of Leonard Cohen style piano work, which presented a nice contrast, but one which built really nicely on operatic synths, which flowed throughout the album in almost the best traditions of almost Pink Floyd, which is where I kind of get some of the Syd Barrett vibes from. I definitely got vibes from Hounds of Love by Kate Bush in some of the vocals. Kate Bush was discovered by David Gilmour, so it's not entirely surprising that all these kind of albums come together, as in if you don't know David Gilmour being the guitarist for Pink Floyd. And you get all those kind of synth pop, psychedelic, slightly dream pop vibes all coming together, because they're all kind of from the same musicians or the same musical tradition. And I think that's why I really like it, because as you all know, it's kind of those are all albums that are up my street. I really like the song Another Day. I really like the song Another Day. The song Another Day definitely gave me those Hounds of Love vibes, and yeah, really, really did build on the best traditions of Pink Floyd. I think even if you hadn't met Cameron and he said that, this album was kind of positioned himself like nicely in his kind of music taste, you could guess what some of his other favorite albums were, because this album so clearly evoked some of those absolute classics. And I'm not saying that as a criticism, and I'm not saying it as a facsimile or any kind of copying, But I think in the best traditions of musical evolution, it took the good parts of those traditions and then expounded upon them in their own way. So I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm in the minority, but I really, really did enjoy it. But that's not really surprising for me because it's slap bang in the middle of the kind of stuff I really like. But yeah, I mean, Cameron.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a really, really great analysis of all the influences that went into it. So thank you. And yeah, I do completely get what Arjun's saying. The vocals they are quite subjective in a way that some people are just immediately turned off by them. Liz Fraser in particular, she has got this ethereal type voice. I mean, it's a musical journalist's favorite game trying to pick out adjectives to describe her singing style. But no, she does have this ethereal voice to her, which can be a big turn off to a lot of people. She often doesn't even speak in real words and instead uses these elongated vowels to make a point. But I digress. The real beauty on this album for me is that it takes a lot of these concepts which were sort of floating around in the underground ether of pop music at the time, and like Ash has said, there've been hints at it in songs like Vienna by Ultravox or whatever, and it's applied that not so much through songwriting, because my favorite song on the record, Song to the Siren, is actually a cover of a Tim Buckley song from the early 70s. So perhaps the songwriting isn't the best, but the willingness to experiment and the vision to produce sonically these types of soundscapes, that's where the value in this album comes from for me, is more of just almost like a reference point in the development of this genre as opposed to a testament to songwriting in itself.
No, I think I agree. I mean, after hearing kind of our description of where it comes from, Jay, I know you're a massive Pink Floyd fan. Does that make you want to listen to it again? Does that change how you perceive it retrospectively?
I mean, I think it's unfair to say I didn't like it. I definitely liked the album. I think, to an extent, I think it's one of those albums that you maybe can't appreciate. I've said this again about Monkey Bars. I'm saying it again here. You maybe can't fully appreciate it on the first listen. One point I think you made is very valid is the Kate Bush influence, because I said the siren-y kind of vocals, that kind of reminded me of, the ninth wave Kate Bush, which I think is probably the better half of Hounds of Love, where she's, especially the song Dream of Sleep, that kind of, that kind of eerie atmosphere, I think is what it created. I just think, I just don't necessarily think I liked it when it kind of, let me kind of get into this atmosphere and vibe it was creating. I just felt that there are points where I didn't really connect with the atmosphere of the songs, which I think is something that's very instrumental into dream pop. I'm not necessarily saying that's a criticism of, the album. It might have been my mood when I was listening to it or whatever. But yeah, I'm certainly willing to give it another listen at some point, because I thought there was some good stuff in there and it was certainly interesting.
Arjun, what do you... Sorry.
No, sorry, I do just have one more point that might make Jay even more convinced by it. The track Songs to the Siren, David Lynch originally wanted to use that in one of the scenes of Blue Velvet, but he couldn't get the rights to it, which is why he then found Julie Cruz and got her to record the track Mysteries of Love.
Yeah, so I did say it gave me David Lynch.
That was a direct influence.
Yeah, there was definitely some Eraserhead influence on this album. You can hear it.
Big Lynch vibes.
Yeah, there's big Lynch vibes here.
Arjun, you're a Pink Floyd fan as well. What are your thoughts once you hear this album perhaps contextualized?
Yeah, I find that whole conversation quite interesting. I would perhaps be more inclined to check out different albums along the lines of dream pop, like if Cameron could recommend them to me rather than re-listen to this one. I can see myself appreciating this type of music whilst perhaps not returning to it again and again. I would be interested to listen to it more. Explore the genre as much as possible.
That's all fair enough. So I guess just final word then before we finish, boys. What are you intending to listen to in the upcoming week? Not necessarily our next albums for our next episode, but just more generally, what are you listening to at the moment? So I mean, for me, I'm going to carry on delving into 90s rap. I mean, Arjun's going to take me through some of the Wu-Tang stuff, as I said, so I'm happy to go down that route. And I will try and better engage with some more, I think, psychedelic stuff from the 70s and 80s. Yeah, I mean, Jay, what are you hoping to listen to this week?
Oh, I don't really know. It's a bit random, but I've got kind of one immediate goal is I've been kind of re-listening to the albums of Radiohead, and I've still never listened to The King of Limbs or Moonshaped Pool, which are their two most recent albums. So I think that's kind of top of the listen list, if that's such a thing.
Fair enough. Cameron?
So specifically, I really want to listen to the new Animal Collective EP, Bridge to Quiet, and the latest Sufjan Stevens single, America, which is off his new album, which it will be released in September, I think it is. So I'm really looking forward to those. Genre-wise, I've been listening to quite a bit of Manchester Hacienda type dance stuff from the late 80s recently, which is always good to party to.
That's good. Arjun?
For me, I just honestly choose albums on a whim. I don't seek to listen to an album by a particular artist. I don't think that I'm going to delve into someone's discography and listen to them all in a week. I sort of just purely decide on the day what sort of music I want to listen to. So I can't predict what I'm going to listen to too far in advance. I have, however, been sort of introducing my sister to some hip hop, basic hip hop. So I'm going to continue doing that with her. We've listened to the first few Kanye West albums together. We listened to Illmatic a few days ago.
Beautiful album.
We're currently halfway through The Infamous by Mobb Deep. And then I think after this one, we're going to go back to Kanye West with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy and see how she likes his next couple of albums, which I'm looking forward to introducing her to. So that's sort of a side goal for me, is getting my sister, who's expressed a desire to listen to more hip hop, and just doing that with her.
No, that's good. I mean, yeah, Illmatic is obviously one of my very, very favorite albums ever, I think, of any genre. So yeah, I'm happy that she's getting to explore that. So yeah, boys, thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed it. I really did. I think that was a really good exploration of the albums. And yeah, I can't wait to see you next time on Waxing Lyrical from the Symposium. We'll have another 4 albums to talk about. We'll have more wider talking points. And yeah, we hope it doesn't get too esoteric. So thanks. See you next time. Cheers.
The Symposium with Ash Aulak.